It's 2 a.m. in the morning. There's a wildfire moving towards a suburb, and someone is standing in a command center trying to answer three questions at once. Which roads are still passable? Which hospitals can people actually reach? And where does the power grid fail next? Now, imagine a world model that holds all of that in one live picture. It's not a chatbot writing a summary. It's a system that keeps a working model of that exact landscape and runs it forward. Show me the next 20 minutes. Show me what happens if I evacuate north instead of east. How would you trust this answer? Because with a chatbot, you can check the answer. You can run it against another LLM. A world model doesn't give you an answer. It gives you a prediction, a possible future. And to grade it, you'd have to run reality alongside it and compare. Nobody can do this.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Signal Room, where we decode the signals we're at the intersection of AI and localization. Unfortunately, Karina couldn't make it with us this week. She's flying back from Australia and our flight got delayed. So I'm here with my usual panelists, Jonas and Wada'a. So hi guys, how are you doing?
Hey Vince, hey Jonas, good to see you.
Hi Wada'a, where are you? Looks very nice.
I am sitting at my deck. I was just telling Jonas earlier, I started working early. It's the last few days of summer and it's just such a beautiful weather. So I decided to record from the deck. So apologies for any resolution changes throughout the episode or background noise like birds chirping or the occasional prime truck passing through.
That proves we're not AI generated. Jonas, where are you?
I'm in New York office again, back from Europe.
And I'm in Barcelona, same as usual. Okay, guys, there's only three of us. Let's try keep sharp on top of this week and see how we go. Interestingly, I with Karina not being able to come and join us, I asked the AI panelists to generate some signals and respond to the quickfire questions. So we have some answers from that as well as the usual three from us. So let's start quickly with the quickfire, get us going.
Churn is a hot topic right now, and plenty of vendors are struggling with it. What is interesting, though, is that how quickly they default to blaming AI as the root cause of the churn. But then you start digging deeper in the CX and EX survey results, and clients have been raising red flags all along. Time to market, slow responsiveness, inconsistent quality, limited understanding of the suite of services that the vendor offers, so they end up bouncing. The vendor either missed those signals or never classified them as a churn waiting to happen. And I think every one of these elements are within a vendor's control. Now, there are areas where the vendor has absolutely no control over, such as a company going out of business or an executive mandate where the CEO or the CFO, it comes from the top saying, we're going to adopt this new LLM and you're going to have to eliminate and kill redundancies around it. So that might be a little bit hard to navigate. And these areas, the vendors have no control over, but the rest is winnable. Vendors who eliminate distractions and concentrate on what they have control over can actually curb the churn. And I think having this clarity is the art of account management. And I try to nurture vendors in that space, knowing exactly what you own as a vendor, prove to the client that you're best in class. And most importantly, make sure that the client understands the full suite of services and functionality that you're offering. So they're not bouncing or considering to bounce, and this doesn't become a contract renewal conversation. And I think that they should stop labeling fixable problems as circumstances, that are completely beyond your control.
Where do you think that line of control is, though? Do you think we're starting to see a certain amount of vendor lock-in? We're starting to, same as similar what we would have seen around technology, around, say, TMSs in the past. And you can see that the AI business is kind of going that way. People are trying to lock people into their mindset. You can see very different end target, but ultimately a lot of them are playing in the same sort of space, to keep control of the environment. Do you think that's going to become more prevalent? Do you think we
It
need
is
to keep autonomy away from that?
I think it's becoming prevalent. I guess the point I'm trying to make with Churn is that what I'm observing is that most vendors are panicking over areas they have no control over, whereas they're discounting and not focusing on the areas where they have absolutely control over. And I've experienced this firsthand with some of the vendors. So when they came to me with a question or a statement saying, well, churn is high, we don't know what's going on. And my initial reaction was, what did you change? What did you do differently this time around? And the answer was nothing. We're doing the same thing. We're offering the same support. But then you start looking at the customer survey results and you realize that there were a lot of areas that were red flags, churn waiting to happen. But the vendor, for some reason, was so focused on blaming AI for it and not having this clarity around what they can do to curb this churn or have the right conversation to navigate a difficult situation. So if a mandate is coming from the executive leadership, and I went through the exact same thing at Zendesk, where AI took the industry by storm, and we were told that we needed to use X, Y, and Z and kill redundancies. So the immediate reaction was, yes, of course, we will. We ended up integrating with the system. So this is an area that is tough to navigate. But everything else, if you actually concentrate on as a vendor, make sure that the client is happy and understand the full suite of services that you offer, then the churn might be curbed or controlled even better. I think there's a lack of clarity right now between what you have control over as a vendor versus not. And this is where account management prevails.
Yeah, I agree. I think if I look back at the last 20 years or whatever it is for me in the industry, complacency is the biggest, almost always the root cause for churn. And it might result in different things. You blame AI or you blame whatnot, but it's almost always complacency on the vendor side. And that includes, I have to admit, a couple of cases of us having lost clients. And then looking back at why that happened, it's almost always been a certain level of complacency. We had worked with someone for a long time and we kind of thought we were on top of it. We know what they want. But those things evolve sometimes quickly or slowly. And if you're not on top of that with account management, it's very easy to lose a customer.
Interesting. Maybe we'll come back to that one. I think we should do a buyer special at some point, guys, and look at some of those challenges that change in market for that. My own signal this week was, again, to do with Google releasing a report, which was on the use of AI in business based on the usage through Gemini and other models that they're monitoring. And they showed very high penetration. A lot of people are using AI. There was a lot, particularly in the agencies, in the areas you'd expect, in marketing and HR, in preparation of large documents and sales, for example, and then in coding. But what I found interesting about the report was that even though they were saying 70 or 80% of people that you would expect to be using AI are using AI in their daily business, it only penetrated into 20% of tasks. So it really was being used in very limited slices of what the capabilities were. And it was pointing that rather than replacing roles, it was augmenting roles, removing certain tasks and allowing for growth in other ways. So rather than reducing human work, it was amplifying it in a certain way. The second thing that I pointed out that I thought was really interesting was that there was a gap called Runaway, which meant that more experienced people who started to evolve and use AI got much better results out of it than junior people coming in. And that was an ever-widening gap because you have the experience of being able to know how you want to prompt or what results you're trying to achieve. You move quicker. And as a result, it's creating a knowledge gap that it was pointing at that within a few years, that could be a problem moving forward in terms of how do we continue to drive stuff forward. So that was my signal. I thought it was an interesting one.
It reminds me of something I heard from McKinsey. So they talked about having a new set of senior partners and the advice they gave at that point to junior consultants was to stop producing AI slop and build relationships and have some fun instead, which was kind of refreshing, honestly. They were kind of saying that currently they use AI successfully. So in the past, they might have worked until 11 p.m. or whatnot on a PowerPoint. Now they were able to get that PowerPoint ready by 6 p.m. And that extra time that they would get, I guess, after 6 p.m. instead of having some time off was to go socialize and build relationships. And that's what's going to matter in the future. It's not whether you can use the AI, but those social skills will be more important, which I found interesting, that it's not necessarily now using AI in the data from Google that you mentioned, maybe was a little bit more on the negative side, that it's not really changed things too much yet. But I do think that it will get to a point where intelligence is not the scarce resource, it's actually judgment and social skills, which I found interesting from the McKinsey one.
Yeah. And I think the gap is real between seasoned professionals leveraging AI and entry-level employees leveraging AI, because I think at this stage in our career, we leverage AI as a support mechanism. We have the experience, we want to avoid the daily grind, so we leverage AI to alleviate some of the pressure. But entry-level employees are actually looking at AI as a mentor. In a certain way, the LLM's smarter than them. And this gap is real. And I think we touched on this in one of the previous sessions. I'm really concerned about the next generation entering the market and developing these skills that will help them later in the career.
Yeah, I could say, I think there's been an awareness that next strata of most industries is going to have to change. I think that maybe the Google report was also showing that while some tasks will go away, it still needs to be considered as a guidance task around it to ultimately get the results out of it. So it was an interesting one for me. Jonas, how about you? What signals have you had this month?
We've talked about world models a few times, but we just kind of quickly touched on it. So I saw some stats over the last week or so around world models, and that in the first half of 2026, world model startups raised more than $2 billion in disclosed funding. So it is more than that overall. That funding went to World Labs, AMI Labs, Odyssey, Decart, and I think World Labs and AMI Labs are fairly well known now, given that they were founded and are run by Fei Li and Yan LeCun, sort of familiar names, obviously in the AI space. And these startups are backed by companies or investment entities like NVIDIA, Amazon, Andreessen Horowitz, and Jeff Bezos. So not small investors in that sense either. So this category kind of went from niche to billion-dollar bets in the last 6 months. And on top of that, Anthropic is currently in talks to acquire Decart, one of the world model labs, which is in itself interesting, since Anthropic obviously is very much in the LLM side of the debate. And that debate is ongoing, obviously, is are we going to build super intelligence or AGI based on LLM architectures, or do we need something different where world models probably is the biggest bet right now? So signal basically that world models are coming up more and more as an area of investment and interest.
Where do you think the actual end point for the world models will be? Well, I think a lot of it is used for test environments or modeling of what happens if I put this box here, what happens, or, larger models, obviously it's a very simplistic version, but where do you see this kind of goes? Is it when models are being generated on the fly? I think it's the target at the moment.
Yeah, it's a big question for sure. If it is the future path to super intelligence, then that's the foundation of all AI, essentially, different kinds of world models, right? Which is the point that the likes of Yan LeCun is making. Yan LeCun, obviously, famously the chief AI officer at Meta before he left recently to really focus on world models. So if that fork prevails, then it's going to be everything within the AI space, right? That not just moving a box, but it's also going to govern how AI works across language and culture and like all imaginable areas of use cases in that sense.
Wada'a, what do you think?
Well, Jonas, do you think there's a benchmark good enough for a policymaker to judge whether one of these world models is safe to deploy where lives are on the line?
Definitely not yet. So it is still early stage. And I think that's an interesting question for us to also think about as an industry, right? How do you benchmark that? How do you evaluate it? How do you contribute to it? Because there's so many use cases that are possible, and it goes much deeper than looking at just language, right? That there
Absolutely.
it cuts into any situation where there's human interaction, where you would need to somehow have governance or at least a way to measure and evaluate and benchmark it.
Because here's a scenario that I read about a couple of days ago. It's 2 a.m. in the morning. There's a wildfire moving towards a suburb, and someone is standing in a command center trying to answer 3 questions at once. Which roads are still passable? Which hospitals can people actually reach? And where does the power grid fail next? Now, imagine a world model that holds all of that in one live picture. It's not a chatbot writing a summary. It's a system that keeps a working model of that exact landscape and runs it forward. Show me the next 20 minutes. Show me what happens if I evacuate north instead of east. How would you trust this answer? Because with a chatbot, you can check the answer. You can run it against another LLM. A world model doesn't give you an answer. It gives you a prediction, a possible future. And to grade it, you'd have to run reality alongside it and compare. Nobody can do this. So world models are a lot more than self-driving cars like Waymo or, I don't know, robots on a factory floor. Now, speaking of Fei Li, Stanford's HCCI Institute published a brief around this topic exactly. And their conclusion was blunt. There is no benchmark good enough at this point for a policymaker to judge whether one of the world models is safe to deploy when lives are on the line. So the question isn't whether the simulation looks nice and real and fancy, it's whether it matches reality closely enough to make a decision on. And interestingly enough, Fei Li was one of the authors of this paper. And so she's providing the same warning, which leaves us in a strange place. I mean, we're teaching machines to imagine a physical world, and we're starting to act on what they imagine, but we haven't yet agreed on how to tell the difference between what's a good imagination and what's a safe and convincing one.
Yeah, I think it might be a good idea for everyone to sort of look at evolution of LLMs and where that started and where it is now and how relatively long that took after all. I mean, things have certainly accelerated and is moving super fast now, but the foundation of that happened probably 10 years ago or so of where we are now in the space of LLMs. And world models have been around as a concept for a long time, but really as a discipline at this level, not very long. So AMI Labs and World Labs, where Fei Li is, I think were founded in the last year or so. So it is still early days. And I think it's also important to really define what a world model is in a sense, and then look at how you can, the scenario that you mentioned, how would it work for that scenario where probably you have 5 or 10 or 15 different world models integrate or collaborate on estimating what road or predicting what road to take in that scenario. So I don't there probably won't in a long time be one world model that can simulate and make decisions on the entire physical world, but many small models for different specific areas or use cases that might work together.
Something interesting that came up, you've talked about the evolution of LLMs around it. I was when I was doing some of the research around this, I found a strand of research that was talking about how LLMs localize stories. So it was from the creative writing side of generative AI and the model side. So what were the characteristics around it? And one of the characteristics was actually the world remain quite bland, quite generic. and they just insert local references or local small bubbles of local cultural reference or the thing to cause the effect of localization as a perception of localization, but it doesn't actually have a localized environment. It's still running as homogeneous playing in the background. And there was some consideration that, well, maybe world models are not going to reach that level of success because if they generate in the same way, ultimately you're going to be modeling the same thing just with a different dressing on it,
Yeah.
Which I thought was an interesting one.
I think it's like if we look at the current architecture of LLMs, obviously text-based, I have a hard time seeing how that's going to lead to AGI or superintelligence, especially in a physical world. So I do think that we should not underestimate the potential of world models, but I do agree that it'll take a long time for world models to be culturalized or localized, whatever you call it, right? On that topic that you mentioned, road signs, what I mentioned, self-driving cars as well, I think it's probably the first use case that has legs or have come pretty far based on how much data there is at automotive or autonomous driving companies. But I was talking to someone just last week about world models and tacit knowledge and sort of what the human angle to world models might be. Shout out to Armour at Cognicy, who has done a lot of research in this space. So you mentioned one example where it wouldn't work today unless you have culturalized it enough. And it was a traffic example as well, that and how it might differ in different markets or different cultures. So in Sweden, a pedestrian would expect a car to stop when you get a crosswalk, for example. But that might not be the case in the same way in other countries. Like in China, for example, it would be the driver would drive and the pedestrian would have to wait until they find a space to cross the street, even when they're at the crosswalk, if there's no red sign or traffic signs. And then Almer mentioned this other example of how a raised palm can mean slow down in India, whereas it almost always means stop in the US or Sweden or most other countries. So if it would work as it would in the US, in India, probably the car would stop in the middle of the street and it would be a crash. Someone would hit them from the back, right, because of that. So I think there is a huge localization or culturalization problem in world models that we or all of us have to address at some point for them to work properly.
And I think the distinction is there's a big difference between LLMs and world models, and people maybe tend to confuse them. An LLM provides you with an answer. A world model provides you with a prediction, a near future. These are two separate things. And I think this is what is going to make localization quite challenging. On that note, regarding traffic, Jonas, in many countries I've been to, in order to cross the street, you have to rely on eye contact. So imagine how this can happen from a localization perspective.
Yeah.
I wonder whether this belongs in localization at all. Like, to me, I'd almost be going, well, who would be validating and how would they validate? And I think it'd be very little to do with language and more to do with just experiential. And I think so gamers, for example, and gamers who drive, for example, used to living in a virtual world and able to maneuver around it and be observant about their environment could be very useful in testing that, where a language expert probably would have very minimal value.
You need a lot of it to be pre-training as well, not just evaluating it, but actually have that cultural input into building the world model. So when the AI based on the world model is making that prediction, already has the cultural aspects as one part of the consideration for it. But certainly, yes, you would also need evaluation post-training, and that's an interesting challenge. How do you look at that? But maybe it's similar to RLHF in LLMs, that you observe the action that the AI took, and then whether the outcome was the desired outcome or not, and then that becomes a feedback loop.
Wada'a, any last thoughts on this?
Well, I think I agree with Jonas. I do think, though, that it's going to be an afterthought. Localization is going to be an afterthought in world models, just like it has always been in our world. People are going to build the foundation in English for a certain culture. And then after a few accidents and liability issues, they're going to start paying attention to the localization side of things. I don't think AI would be enough to build in the localization or the cultural component into the world model from the get-go.
Does that mean then, though, if there's that level of silo in it, that, well, we reach AGI, but it only works in America, or we reach AGI and it only works in China, because that's all we've modeled, that we reach ASI and it only works in Europe because that's what we've built for. I think there's a risk of that we don't actually hit the global barrier, benchmark, or whatever it is that they're looking for.
That's my prediction. They'll find a way to hit the global markets because a lot of the companies' revenues, the global revenue is higher than the US revenue. So, of course, they're going to want to, their outreach strategy is going to include global markets. But what I'm saying is that at the foundational level, the engineers, they're not going to think about localization from the get-go. They might, it's just my prediction. And they might fine-tune later on, depending on the needs.
It's going to be a financial reality, to Wada'a's point, that they will want to get these models working globally because there's a global market for it. So it's inevitable, honestly. I hope that all of us have learned from past experience that's the usual cycle. So why not get ahead of that and actually get it culturalized and localized in the first go? But it's kind of natural that some of the frontier development happens where the frontier labs sit. From a global perspective, it's kind of interesting then. I guess AMI Labs specifically, they've kind of, I think we mentioned at some point, have distanced themselves a little bit from Silicon Valley. They're headquartered in Paris and they have their US headquarters in New York. So they might take a different approach to this topic as well.
And it could be a phased approach. It's not going to be 50 markets and cultures and languages all at once. They're going to start with the top, and demographics are going to lead the way too.
When I was brainstorming with different agents around this topic, one of them came back with something that I thought was pretty good. It said, you call it a world model. It's a weird model. Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic, and it has never been to most of the world. I thought, oof, burn.
That's pretty sophisticated if it was an original thought.
No, I don't know where it came from, but it's totally just, it's from DeepSeek V4 Pro. I was just like, whoa, that's actually pretty boring. Okay, so let's move on. I have one last thing I want to do before we move on to the recommendations. So we have the AI panelist that kind of sits along and kind of keeps an eye on what we're doing as we go through the show. And after the last few episodes, I asked it to kind of review what we've been doing and come back with like some comments for us, because we sit here and we all agree and we think we've nailed it down. But so we're calling this section, The Machine Bites Back. We don't know if it's going to last even longer than one episode. So let's try, there's a couple of different ways we could try it. So first of all, who's been the series' most underused panelist?
I think first of all, you surprised me again, Vince. I had no idea that you were going to throw this curveball at us. Do you want to go first, Wada'a? To answer that question.
I think it was fairly distributed or evenly distributed, but maybe I am the optimistic here. I may be missing something.
I think you're the one that has been underused. I think we should give more space to you. I like your insight. So that's why I wanted you to go first as well.
Oh, thank you. I thought I had enough time to share my thoughts. So that's interesting. Okay.
So actually, that's Jonas nails it. Yeah, the answer is Wada'a. The lowest share was in episode 7, 15.5%, and as host, our buyer voice collapsed to 24.2 words per turn. The panel's most cited researcher keeps getting muted. So I thought that was a pretty good one. Held us to account. Who said blame OpenAI and never walked it back?
I didn't.
I don't know.
So it was Jonas on liability in episode 8. He said blame OpenAI was his whole answer. And it's still the industry's closest thing. It's still the industry's closest things to a governance position. And I actually thought that was a burn, but I looked it up and you go in the transcript, that was his entire answer. We were making a joke in a quick fire round. To be fair, it's a bit considered. Oh, this is, two more. Vincent has been the panelist most consistently wrong in predictions. True or false?
I wouldn't say wrong. I would say unorthodox, and I like that.
Yeah, that's a good way to frame it. I like that too. I think you take a different position on things more often than the rest of us, which is a good thing.
Well, the AI says that's completely false. There's no receipt to support that. End of the gravy train is the serious, sharpest structural call, and he reframes what's happening into what it means more than anyone. So there you go. Thanks a lot. There's more if you want them.
I'm intrigued.
You want
One more?
Well, it actually made one for each of us directly. So for me, I'll go me first. Vincent, you proposed a risk value on every string, sentence, and component. That is not governance. It is a verification bill handed to the humans that AI was supposed to onboard. And I remember this. We were talking about pre-grading content and the evaluation of it. I think it's a fair comment. I don't think realistically we should be grading every single segment like that. But a little bit of hyperbole never harmed me. So that's it for me. With that, what did it say for you? This was an interesting one. Wada'a predicted that the accountability layer would be switched off or refunded quietly. Everyone nodded. Then each of you kept selling the layer that gets switched off. Which is it?
Well, that's out of context, though. I specifically said that if the accountability layer is creating friction, then it will be defunded or quieted.
That's exactly what I remembered it as well. Yeah. So yeah, I thought it was a bit selective and not given enough context. Was a very fair one. This is a good one for Jonas. Jonas, you expose vendors who charge empty PE rates and walk back promises. You're the vendor. Were you describing your own sales motions?
I think we still charge NTP rates in many cases, but less and less so. So it's definitely changing, but we're not there yet. But we're talking about future signals that indicate the future, right? So I'll still stand by that position.
It's funny enough, I don't disagree with that position. I kind of think there's been a lot, not exactly the detail of it, but the spirit of it. I think there's been a lot of time in this industry where we've made things a lot more complicated than they need to be, so as we can get a little bit more on them. And I don't think it's particularly any one company or any one program or any one application type of supplier or whatever. I think it's across the company. I think it's not unnatural in the localization industry. I think it probably exists in most industries that certain aspects of our jobs, we make it seem maybe a little bit more challenging than it is. So in other places, we can make it seem simpler than it actually is. Do you know what I mean? So I don't think it's an unfair comment, but I did think it was good that I caught you on it. Okay, that's the end of the Machine Bites Back for this week, but I think we'll do it again. It'll be good if with a few more of us to be able to make comment on it. Oh yeah, recommendations. So finally, Jonas.
I talked about machinereaders.com a few times now. So something similar. So another experiment or platform that looks at agents and how they work, what they do in various environments. So something called Emergence World. It's a simulation of a society using different models. So basically they let these agents run a society over an extended period of time. And it's meant to observe how these models, agents perform, and that over a period of time, so a longer term experiment. So they basically set up a world, if you like, based on a specific model, agents using a specific model. And every world started out the same. So the agents formed the democracy, they wrote newspapers, they fell in love, and so on. It was interesting to see how the different worlds developed based on what model they used. So the first one was Claude. So Claude created a functioning society with zero crime. So well done, Anthropic, on that. Gemini created a constitution, but for some reason they taxed harmony and subsidized chaos. So quite a bit of crime. ChatGPT debated forever, basically just talked, and all the agents died.
That I can believe.
Well, Grok, of course, then complete chaos, 204 crimes, including arson of the police station. All agents died again. So it was a fun read, but it's also actually a serious platform, right? So they want to use it for research for multi-agent behavior over time. But I found it interesting and sort of timely because it kind of points toward world models as well, even though it's using LLMs in this case still. So definitely an interesting read. Check out Emergence World.
Emergence World. That sounds interesting. Wada'a?
I want to recommend an app. I started using it recently. It's called Dilemmo, and it's part of the Deep Stash suite of apps. Deep Stash offers summaries of books. So if you sign up for the suite, you get access to Dilemmo as a perk. And I found it very interesting because it's self-evaluation. So if you don't have access to development or you're not part of an organization who spends time on development, this app is amazing because it helps you self-develop at the professional life, at the personal life. It asks pointed questions, it assesses your personality, and then it provides you with tips, and it evolves with your journey. So try it out. Let me know what you think.
Super. Give us it again. What's the name again, Wada'a?
Dilemmo. Dilemmo, but it's part of the Deep Stash suite. So once you sign up to Deep Stash, you have access to all of these apps. Dilemmo is one of them.
Super. Sounds good. My recommendations, as they often are, is around music this time. So my niece is 18 and an emo, which is we used to call GOTS back in the days, and she's been asking me to keep an eye out for music for her. And I found this singer called Mafra, M-A-P-H-R-A. Maybe she's already famous all over the world and a million seller, and I'm just a boomer coming late to the story. But extremely interesting voice in a edge of heavy metal kind of space, but really, really phenomenal dynamics. Young girl. And then that kind of spun me down this kind of crazy heavy metal, intense music thing that I hadn't looked at for a while. And I came across this band called Heilung, Heilung. And they kind of feel like they should be in a movie or something, like Spinal Tap or something. They're like total hippies, heavy metal, they make their own instruments and they all dress up with, reindeer horns and whatever. But their music is like phenomenal. And they sing in ancient Norse and in old German and, loads of kind of reclaiming the Viking mindset, all of this. So both of those are very interesting. So Mafra for pure quality of voice and Heilung for, this is what heavy metal should be and everyone should sing in old German kind of thing. It's very interesting.
Germany or
No, I think they're from Norway. They're from Norway.
Makes sense.
I think they're from about 5 or 6 different countries, but I think they're based in Norway. Like I say, I fell into a rabbit hole and these were two things that came up with that were very interesting. So I'd be interested to see what you think. We can discuss it next time we meet. Okay, guys. Thank you for your time. Another interesting episode. Hurry home, Karina. Could be here for the next time. You'll have double questions from the agent for next show. Okay, guys. Talk to you all. Thanks for coming. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Spence.